My daughter-in-law said, "You are not on the deed. You will never set foot in that estate." The realtor did not meet my eyes. He held a thick folder, as if it were a shield, and asked the room if everyone was ready to sign. Chairs scraped, pens clicked. I felt the cold on my palms, where I had caught myself after Kendra shoved my chair toward the corner. Investors and lawyers sat in neat rows, their faces polite and distant. They sipped water and pretended not to hear. Kendra adjusted her blazer and gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Sit quietly, Laura," she murmured. "Do not make this awkward." My son Ethan turned from the mortgage broker and gave me the look he uses when correcting a student. "Mother, please, you are too old to understand how these things work. Do not waste anyone's time." His voice was even, almost gentle, which somehow hurt the most. A woman in a slate dress shifted her files. The room smelled like polished wood and strong coffee. I walked to the chair Kendra had banished to the farthest corner and sat with my hands folded in my lap. From here I could see everything. The cream pages with gold clips, the way people glance and then look away, as if pity might be contagious. They had called me a tenant in a house I helped keep standing. They told me to be grateful for a basement room. I remembered carrying Ethan through wet winter streets when he had croup. I remembered counting cash at my bakery at midnight, hands raw from soap and flour, promising myself that tomorrow would be kinder. "Power of attorney," Kendra said, sliding a crisp packet to the center spot where a pen waited. "One signature, and you can relax. We will handle the rest." She tapped the page with a manicured nail. The sound was small and sharp. I let the quiet settle. I studied the letters without touching the pen. The realtor swallowed. The broker cleared his throat. Somewhere in the hall, an elevator chimed and closed again. Outside the glass, gulls wheeled over the river, white wings flashing, then gone. Inside, the air thinned, as if the room held its breath and waited on my answer alone. Silence is not surrender. It is a door that opens for the person who can wait. I folded my hands tighter and breathed in. They saw an aging woman, grateful for a chair in the light. They did not see the ledgers I keep in my head, the maps I have walked in the dark. They did not see what I know about this land and the hand that holds it. So I sat, half in shadow, and waited for the moment that would turn the room. I had not always been the woman they thought they could push into a corner. There was a time when my hands were strong from kneading dough before dawn, my back straight from carrying trays to the counter of the little bakery I built from nothing. That bakery paid for Ethan's school clothes, his sports trips, and later, his college tuition. It kept the lights on and food on the table when his father left with nothing but a muttered apology and the keys to our car. When I sold the shop and moved into Ethan's home in Portland, I thought it would be a new chapter. I imagined Sunday dinners, holidays together, the hum of family life I had missed while working myself thin. Instead, it began with small cuts. The first time Kendra introduced me to her friends, I stood ready with a plate of muffins, still warm from the oven. She gestured toward me with a bright social smile. "This is our live-in nanny," she said, as if I were staff instead of the woman who raised her husband alone. They laughed lightly, thinking it a joke. She never corrected them. I held the tray steady, feeling the heat seep into my palms, and let the coldness bloom in my chest. She eyed my oak dining table, a piece I had saved for years to buy, like it was firewood. "It's charming, but it belongs in a cabin. We'll replace it with something modern," she said. 2 days later it was gone, replaced by glass and chrome that looked cold no matter what meal sat on it. The garden I tended behind the house fared no better. Rows of tomatoes, peppers, herbs I had planted in careful lines were uprooted without a word. I found the compost bin full of fresh vegetables one morning. "They're not certified organic," Kendra shrugged from the patio, sipping coffee, as if that explained throwing away a month's work. Then came the utilities. Ethan sat me down at the kitchen table, papers in hand. "It's only fair you pay your share," he said. "You have your own room." He didn't mention the mortgage I had helped finish paying years earlier, when he and Kendra were on the brink of losing the house. Fairness in his eyes began only when it benefited them. The worst was the winter I caught pneumonia. A week in the hospital left me aching for my own bed, but when I came home, a stranger's suitcase blocked my door. "We rented your room," Kendra said casually. "You can stay in the basement for now. The rent helps with bills." Ethan, leaning in the doorway, added, "One less mouth to feed." That basement was bare concrete, a single bulb, the hum of the water heater, my only company. Above me, laughter and the clink of wine glasses floated down through the vents. I stared at the ceiling and began keeping a ledger in my mind, not of money, but of debts, every insult, every theft of dignity, every cold dismissal. I did not rage, I did not beg, I simply wrote it down in silence, knowing one day the balance would be paid in full. The turning point came quietly, tucked inside a plain envelope, with my mother's handwriting on it. She had passed away months earlier in a small Idaho town, where she'd lived her whole life, and I'd expected nothing more than a few photographs or recipes in her will. Instead, the lawyer explained that she had sold a stretch of farmland just before her death. After debts were cleared, the remaining sum was mine. It was more money than I had ever seen at once, enough to do more than survive, enough to change the rules. I didn't tell Ethan, I didn't tell Kendra. I knew exactly what they would do if they caught even the scent of it. Instead, I called the one person I trusted completely, Marisol Vega, my best friend since we were 12. We hadn't spoken often in recent years. She was now a high-level financial consultant in Seattle, but I knew her well enough to understand she valued discretion above everything. When I explained what I wanted, she didn't ask why. She only asked, how much? I told her the full amount. She whistled low under her breath, then said, "We can build something untouchable with that." Within weeks, she had created a trust in Nevada, one of the few states with the strongest asset protection laws in the country. On paper, it belonged entirely to her firm. In reality, every cent flowed back to me. We added layers, shell companies, registered agents in 3 different states, ownership split into careful percentages. My name vanished from every document like ink washed clean from a page. At first, we bought small stakes in several stable companies. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Then one day, Marisol called with a slow smile in her voice. "You're not getting to believe this," she said. "One of the firms developing a new luxury coastal estate in Oregon is looking for silent investors." I didn't need to ask which estate. I already knew. Kendra had been talking about it for months. The $64 million crown jewel on the bluff above Cannon Beach, all glass walls and ocean views. Ethan called it their future legacy. We began buying shares in the development company quietly, never in large enough chunks to raise eyebrows, but steadily enough to become significant. By the end of the year, the trust held 42% of the company, and, more importantly, the sole deed to the parcel of land the estate was being built on. Not Ethan. Not Kendra. Not any of the investors sitting at their closing table today. On every registry, the land belonged to the trust, and the trust was mine. From my basement room, I began to see the shape of something I had not felt in years. A plan. A way to balance the ledger without shouting, without pleading, without ever stepping outside the law. I would let them think I was powerless. I would let them believe they had won. And when the time came, I would make sure they learned just how wrong they were. The opportunity to set the trap came sooner than I expected. One chilly March evening, I overheard them in the kitchen, voices low but sharp with excitement. Kendra was scrolling on her tablet, showing Ethan the latest listing photos of the estate. "If we get in before the other offers, we can lock it down," she said, her tone thick with ambition. Ethan grinned, already tasting the victory. "Imagine the parties, the view. We'd finally be in the circle we deserve." Deserve, that word lodged under my skin. But the truth was, they didn't have the liquid cash for the deposit. Every big purchase in their life had been stretched on credit, wrapped in gloss for others to admire. They were asset-rich on paper, but their accounts bled faster than they filled. Marisol and I discussed it over a secure call. "We offer them the deposit," she suggested, "through the trust, of course. But the contract will have teeth." The agreement was simple to anyone skimming. The trust would provide the initial deposit, with the remainder released upon final closing. Hidden in the folds of legal language was the hook. If the trust declined to release the balance for any reason, they would forfeit the deposit entirely to the seller. No refunds, no appeals. Ethan glanced through the paperwork as if it were a menu. Kendra didn't even pretend to read it, just signed with a flourish. To them, this anonymous investor was a gift from the universe. From that moment, I watched them preen. Kendra began ordering furniture for rooms she had never stepped into. Ethan boasted to his friends about the wine cellar he would personally design. They made offhand remarks about turning my garden into a helipad, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to bulldoze. I kept my head down, stirring soup, tending my plants, letting them think I was too small to notice. But every cruel word, every careless plan they spoke within earshot became another thread in the net I was weaving. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit at my desk in the basement, the air smelling faintly of damp cement, and listen to the recordings on my phone. Oregon's one-party consent law made it simple. As long as I was part of the conversation, I could record it. One clip in particular, I replayed often. Kendra, wine-drunk, telling a friend, "The day the papers are signed, I'm shipping the old woman straight to a nursing home. She'll thank me later." I smiled in the dark, not because it was funny, but because she had no idea she was setting fire to her own future. The bait was in place. The contract was signed. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to pull the line, and watch everything they thought they owned slip from their grasp. The day of the closing arrived with a sky the color of steel and the sharp scent of rain drifting in from the coast. Inside the conference room, the walls gleamed with polished walnut panels, and the long table was set with crystal water glasses and neatly stacked folders. I took my assigned seat, once again at the far end, just outside the warm cone of sunlight spilling from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Kendra was already in full performance mode, laughing too loudly at something the mortgage broker said. Ethan moved between conversations, like a man taking victory laps before the race even began. When the realtor cleared his throat and began the formalities, Kendra slid a set of papers across the table toward me. Her manicured nails tapped the top page in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Permanent power of attorney," she said sweetly. "One quick signature, and Ethan won't have to worry about all this tedious paperwork." I scanned the heading, my eyes landing on the fine print beneath. Full and irrevocable control over the parcel of land. The land they believed I held as a meaningless formality. Ethan leaned close enough that I could smell the faint edge of his aftershave. "Mother, if you don't sign, this is the end of whatever relationship we have left," he murmured. His voice was calm, but his hand on the back of my chair tightened with warning. I placed the papers face down and folded my hands over them. The room shifted. Conversations faltered. The realtor's pen hovered mid-air. Kendra's smile cooled. "It's just a formality," she said, glancing at the others, as if to recruit allies. "We're all on the same side here." That was when the door at the far end of the room opened. Two men walked in with quiet authority, the CEO of the development company and their lead attorney. Every suit in the room seemed to straighten at their arrival. Without so much as glancing at Ethan or Kendra, the CEO stopped beside me. "Mrs. Whitman," he said clearly, so everyone could hear, "we have the final contract prepared according to your instructions. If you do not sign, this transaction will be canceled immediately." The words hit like a stone dropped in still water. Ripples of shock spread across the table. Kendra blinked rapidly. According to her instructions, the attorney stepped forward, placing a slim leather folder in front of me. "Mrs. Whitman is a co-owner of this company," he said evenly, "and the sole legal owner of the parcel on which this estate is built. Without her consent, no sale can proceed." I watched the color drain from Ethan's face. The confidence he wore like armor cracked, revealing something smaller, more uncertain underneath. For the first time in months, I straightened my chair and felt the center of the room shift toward me. The balance had changed, and it was only the beginning. I let the silence hang until I could feel it press against the walls. Every face around the table was turned toward me now, Ethan's tense and pale, Kendra's sharpened into disbelief, the others caught between curiosity and discomfort. Finally, I reached into my bag and pulled out a second set of documents. Not the power of attorney they had tried to slip in front of me, but the papers Marisol and I had prepared in absolute secrecy. "I will sign today," I said softly, letting the words settle before I added, "but not what you think." Kendra leaned forward, her lips parting, as if she was about to interrupt. I laid the new documents in front of me, angled so the bold heading was visible to everyone. Transfer of property to the Harbor Light Foundation. "This estate," I continued, "will serve as a permanent residence for single mothers and elderly women who have been abandoned by their families. Every brick, every window, every inch of it will be theirs." Kendra's head jerked toward Ethan. She can," the CEO cut in smoothly, his voice almost amused. "She is the legal owner, and she is within her full rights." Ethan's hands clenched on the table. "Mother, we can talk about this later, privately." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "We will keep this exactly where it belongs, in the light." The attorney cleared his throat, tapping the final page. "There is also an additional clause," he said. "2 honorary sponsors will be listed on all plaques, publications, and official records associated with the property. Ethan Whitman and Kendra Whitman." The shock on Kendra's face was almost comical. Her lips parted again, but no sound came out. She seemed frozen between fury and humiliation. I signed with deliberate strokes, each letter steady. The pen scratching was the only sound in the room. When I slid the papers to the CEO, he smiled faintly. "We will finalize this immediately, Mrs. Whitman." For a moment, I looked at my son. Not the man who had just tried to erase me, but the boy I once carried on my hip through rainstorms, the boy who used to bring me seashells from the shore. That boy was long gone, replaced by someone I could no longer protect. I sat back, feeling the weight in my chest begin to lift. The balance in my ledger was almost even now, almost. The last payment would come soon enough. The next morning, the second part of my plan slipped into motion as easily as turning a key. From my desk in the basement, I selected one particular recording. Kendra's voice, thick with wine and arrogance, telling a friend, "The day the papers are signed, I'm shipping the old woman straight to a nursing home. She'll thank me later." In Oregon, one-party consent meant the law was on my side. I sent the file to a journalist I knew from years ago, a man who specialized in local human interest stories with sharp edges. Within hours, the clip was everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, neighborhood message boards. By noon, it had made the front page of the local paper's website under the headline, "Daughter-in-law's chilling remark at 64 Ampton, closing sparks outrage." At the grocery store, people they'd known for years turned their carts away. At church, no one met their eyes. Their social media accounts became quiet graveyards, the smiling photos buried under a flood of public disgust. Business associates began to vanish too. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were suddenly postponed indefinitely. One of Ethan's key investors withdrew from a deal the same week. Kendra's boutique lost 3 of its biggest clients in a single day. They sold the luxury SUV first, then the boat, then, ironically, the glass and chrome dining table she had once mocked my oak for not matching. By the 3rd month, they had moved into a cramped rental on the edge of town. Blinds always drawn, smiles strained thin when they ventured out. 6 months later, on a cold afternoon with a mist rolling in from the coast, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find them both standing there, rainwater dripping from their coats. Ethan looked thinner, his face drawn. Kendra's hair was pulled back, but the gloss was gone from her eyes. "Mom," Ethan began, voice low. "We don't have anywhere else to go." Kendra's hands twisted the strap of her purse, her gaze fixed on the porch boards. For the first time, she looked smaller, not from the weather, but from the weight of her own choices. I stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen. "Come in." We sat. I poured them each a glass of water. Neither touched it. Ethan leaned forward. "Just until we get back on our feet," he said, almost pleading. I watched them for a long moment, the sound of the rain against the windows filling the silence. My ledger was ready for its final entry. I set my glass down carefully, the quiet click of it on the table sounding louder than it should have. "You know," I began, keeping my voice even, "there's a very nice nursing home in the next town over. Good food, clean rooms, friendly staff." Kendra's head lifted, confusion flashing before recognition hit, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You once told me," I continued, looking directly at her, "that I could choose between a nursing home or a mental hospital. I chose neither, but for you." I let the pause stretch until the rain outside seemed to still. "The nursing home sounds perfect. You should try it." The words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. Ethan's jaw tightened. Kendra's cheeks flushed a deep red, but she said nothing. There was nothing to say. They rose slowly, their chairs scraping against the floor. No protests, no last-ditch excuses, just the weight of understanding between us. I walked them to the door. Outside, the drizzle had softened into a mist, the street quiet, except for the distant sound of waves. Across the street, a neighbor pretended to prune her roses, though her eyes followed every step as Ethan and Kendra made their way down the path. By the time they turned the corner, their shoulders slumped. I could no longer hear their footsteps. I stood in the doorway for a moment, breathing in the damp salt air. My hands were steady. The ledger I had been keeping for years was finally balanced. I did not slam the door. The silence was enough. Later, I knelt in my garden, the earth cool beneath my fingers, the scent of rosemary mingling with the briny wind off the Pacific. The chickens scratched nearby, indifferent to human dramas, concerned only with seeds and sunlight. From here, I could see the hand-painted sign on the gate, "Welcome to Grandma's Garden. Entry by invitation only." To most, it was a quaint decoration. To me, it was a declaration. I harvested the last head of lettuce, its roots dangling with rich soil, and placed it in the basket with tomatoes and basil. The work was rhythmic and grounding. Pull, shake, place, repeat. Each movement a reminder that what you tend carefully will grow, and what you neglect will wither. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold, I spoke aloud to no one in particular. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. I had waited for my moment, and when it came, I spoke in the only language they understood: consequences. That was the lesson I carried, and the one I hoped anyone who heard my story would remember. Because in the end, you do not always need to raise your voice to win. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is simply the one holding all the power.